Hi everyone, and welcome to the introduction to the foreign key. In our last video, we talked about some of the concepts around parent-child relationship between our entities, which in the end makes up our tables. We're going to take this a little bit further. If you recall, what I said is that the foreign key is going to reside in the child table. Well, we need to cover that a little bit more. So this video is going to go into a little bit more detail around what the foreign key is. I truly believe your complete understanding is going to be based upon listening to all the videos this week and possibly going back and listening to other ones again just to make sure you get the concepts down. This concept of building relationships physically, though not an overly hard one, can be tricky to people who haven't done it before. But let's not make this hard. Let's try to make this very simple. Okay? And so that's why we're kind of baby stepping into this and going through it one piece at a time. With that said, the objectives for this particular video is we're going to talk about what a foreign key actually is. How does it relate to a primary key? How and when do we use a foreign key? And looking at our design to plan for the foreign keys. Most times in most courses or most books, usually when you introduce the concept of the primary key, like we did last week, or literally 2 weeks ago, you start talking about the foreign key. And many of you may have already read about the foreign key a little bit. We decided in this course to kind of baby step it in, like I mentioned before. We wanted you guys to get the concept of what a design is, and in building the databases in SQL Server, at least get started with that before we get into all the complexity around building the relationships in SQL Server. And once again, the term complexity might be overstating it. There's nothing hard here, just something new. All right. So hopefully with this video, the previous video, and the videos yet to be listened to for the rest of this week, you'll get a really good understanding of how to build these relationships and what a foreign key is all about and how it relates to a primary key. Anyway, let's get started with this. What is a foreign key? I took this definition, I kind of cut and pasted it right from Google. I'm not sure I like it at all, to tell you the truth. But a foreign key is a field in one table that uniquely identifies a row of another table. If I had to reword that, I would say a foreign key is a column, I should say, in a table that uniquely identifies a row of another table, and that other table being the parent table. Okay? So if you read my second definition here, the one I wrote, thank you very much, a foreign key is a column or columns of data in one table that connects to the primary key data in the original table, the parent table. So the word connects, I'm not quite sure is the right terminology there. It really relates, connects, whatever you want to say. But basically, a foreign key is a column in a table that's going to refer back to the primary key of the parent table. I'm going to say this one more time and use the word child in here. A foreign key is a column of data in one table, the child table, that connects to the primary key data in the original table, which would be the parent table, thus the parent-child relationship. Let's continue on, and hopefully I'll clarify that a little bit more as we kind of get going. Oops, sorry. Characteristics about the primary key and the foreign key here. A foreign key must share the same data type as the primary key of the parent table. Kind of keep that in mind. Not only does it share the same data type, it shares the same structure, the type, the name, and everything as it relates to each other. We're going to make it very simple for you as we kind of walk through this. The foreign key is the key, to building a relationship between tables. All right? It's everything. If we're going to do this physically, the only way we can do it physically is with the concept of a foreign key and primary key. Does that make sense? So based on our discussion of the parent-child, the foreign key will always be in the child table, and the primary key that relates to will always be in the parent table. What do you think so far? Is it making any sense at all? So when do we use it, and where do we use it? How do we use it? All those things, right? Well, let's get started. Once again, I'm not quite sure these couple of slides are going to make you an expert. It's just the beginning, but hopefully as we keep building with the other videos and you practicing, you'll start understanding what we're talking about. If you recall, we use a foreign key, all depends upon the relationships between the tables. That's how it's all done. So we need to understand the relationships. And you guys so far have done a really good job of defining those relationships as it relates to the database design. So if you recall from that database design, there was different types of relationships that can actually take place between the entities. There was one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. And once again, you guys have done a good job up to this point, really starting to understand that and seeing those relationships. Based upon those relationships is how we instill our foreign key, okay, and building it physically within our database. For an example, remember that we stated that every instructor can teach many courses in my example that we've been using throughout this semester so far. To store this physically, we need to be able to relate the instructor to every instance of their courses in the course table. So what does that mean? We need to be able to say in the course table that this is the instructor that taught it. And in doing so, we're going to reference the primary key of that instructor, or the primary key that represents that instructor. And basically, the foreign key is going to be a representation of that primary key for that instructor. Ooh, you might want to go back and re-listen to that a couple hundred times, I'm not sure. But maybe the best thing to do is look at an example. This is sort of a crude example, but I think it gets the point across, okay? Let's go over here and we have our T instructors table right there, right? So let's just pretend this is our T instructors table in SQL Server, nothing too fancy. And in there I have a primary key and the ID is 1. Of course, we would not call it PKID, we would call it INT instructors ID. I probably should have done that when I built this slide. So don't ever say, well, Bob said you could go ahead and put PKID out there. Nope, nope, spell it out correctly. Okay, so then what we're going to do is, and then so we have an instructors table. We have a PKID1 that represents the instructor named Bob. I put a little ellipse right there, if you will, that represents all the other fields that are actually, or columns, I should say, within that particular row too. Okay, we have another row with a primary key of 2. The instructor name is Rose. All right, so what are we saying here? We're saying that Bob has taught 2 courses. So how do we represent that physically in the database? Here's what we do. We go ahead to our courses table, which you've already created, and you have your primary key, which you've already created. That doesn't change. The one thing you're going to do now is add a foreign key that's going to literally point back, connect, refer to, whatever you want to say, the primary key of the instructor table. It's going to be called INT instructor ID. And so what this is saying right here is that because I have this row right here, primary key 1 for the courses, the foreign key is 1, it refers back to the instructor table. Okay, they're both going to be called INT instructor ID. Again, this is saying that Bob taught IT 111. And not only that, he has another row in here that says Bob has taught, this is primary key 2, but the foreign key is 1, referring back to the primary key in the instructor table, IT 101, thus giving us the one-to-many situation. Does that make sense? One being the instructor to many courses. In this case, Rose has taught, she has her foreign key right here too, which points back to the primary key of Rose, and she's taught IT 111. Now, of course, there could be hundreds and hundreds of rows in the courses table, all pointing back to a set of instructors. Okay, I've been teaching for a long time. I probably, over the course of my career at Cincinnati State, probably have taught, I don't know, a couple hundred courses. So I would have 200 rows that would be pointing back to me accordingly. Does that help? Does that make sense a little bit? So what we're going to do physically is we're going to go to that T course table and literally add the foreign key that points back to the primary key of the instructor table. What do you think? I hope that makes sense. Let's go look at our design real fast. I'm going to bring that back up here. Here you go. And so when we look at this design, let me make this a little bit smaller for you. There you go. Well, I don't know. Sorry about that. I got a very touchy mouse. Anyway, with that said, we know right here that we have a many-to-many relationship between students and courses. Well, we didn't deal with many-to-many yet. We only dealt with one-to-many. And so far, how you deal with one-to-many is basically with courses and instructors. What will happen here is because we have a one-to-many situation, wherever the many is, that's the child table. Okay, I mentioned that before in my previous video. The instructor is the parent table. The child table always takes the foreign key. So in our tables, we will add the foreign key for INT instructor ID. That will be pointing back to the instructor ID of the primary key there. How's it point back, you say? Well, we're going to do some things that the DBMS will help us to ensure that it points back and our data is always has the highest level of integrity to it. We'll talk about that in a future video. Other ways it points back is really our select statements. We're going to do these things called joins that actually bridges them together. And so by bridging them together, we'll know they relate to each other, if that makes sense. Once again, maybe getting a little bit ahead of myself. But for the most part, our goal here is to always put the foreign key in the child table representing the primary key of the parent table. Now, you might be dying right now going, well, okay, that sounds good. I got that down, Bob. Thanks very much. How about students and courses? We'll talk about that in another video here this week.